When I was younger, there was a girl I knew who lived in our neighborhood. None of the kids liked her because they claimed that she stank and acted weird. When they talked about her, I kind of felt bad, so I became friends with her. Yeah, of course, I got the, why do you hang out with her? But she really wasn't all that bad. But her scent, they were kind of right about that. One day, she invites me over to her house, and she was very excited because she told me I was the first person to ever come over. And I felt so honored, so I went. But when I went into her house, it smelled very bad, almost nauseating, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be rude. She had a lot of uncles that lived with her family. Honestly, it was like 4 to 5 families in one house, to be honest. But she first introduced me to her stepmom. I said hi to her, but she just stared at me in disgust. Then we went to her room to play. As it got later, I told her I needed to go home. But she begged me to stay longer because she was scared. I told her I'd come tomorrow, and she just starts crying. She runs into her bed and falls into her sheets, which lifted her skirt. There were bruises all over her thighs. Let me know if y'all want a part 2. Part 2 about the girl I knew who lived in my neighborhood. So it's late and it's time for me to go home. She said she was scared and starts crying. Then she runs into her bed and flops into her sheets. Her skirt lifted and there were bruises all around her thighs. I ask her, what happened? She looks down and quickly pulls her skirt over her bruises. I ask, did someone do that to you? And she says she can't tell me. I ask why. She responds, if I do, they're going to hurt me. So I ran downstairs to her stepmom and told her what I saw. She sits and laughs in my face. I was so confused and asked her, are you gonna help her? And she tells me that little hoe can help herself and that I actually should be going home. So I went into the living room where her uncles were and told them. One of them had said, that's why that girl don't need to be bringing random folks into the house, and runs upstairs to her room. One of the other uncles asks, you want to get popped? I shook my head in fear and said no. And he yells at me, telling me to go home. From there, I ran home and never came back. And after that day, she never came back outside. It's been 7 years. To this day, I wonder what happened to her. This story time is from a follower, and he really needs advice. By the way, we're calling him Jason, and he's 17. So Jason has been with his girlfriend for about 1.5 years. The whole relationship was great, and they never had any serious problems until recently. Jason came out as bi and told Kayla, and he still wanted to be with her, but Kayla broke things off with him. She told him that she didn't want to be with a bisexual man. So after breaking all ties with him, she distanced herself, and after 2 months of being apart, Kayla says she started to feel really weird and she was sick. Come to find out, she was pregnant. But Kayla doesn't want the baby and wants to get an abortion because she doesn't want nothing to do with Jason. But Jason, on the other hand, really wants the baby. He said he knows he's young, but he's prepared. Jason feels really conflicted. He loves Kayla and wants her to do what's best for her. But he said he'll take care of the baby himself and be a single dad if he could. But guys, please give him some advice down below in the comments. Once there was a girl named Jenny. She was like all the other girls except for one thing. She always wore a green ribbon around her neck. There was a boy named Alfred in her class. Alfred liked Jenny and Jenny liked Alfred. One day he asked her, why do you wear that ribbon all the time? I cannot tell you, said Jenny. But Alfred kept asking, why do you wear it? And Jenny would say, it's not important. Jenny and Alfred grew up and fell in love. One day they got married. After their wedding, Alfred said, now that we're married, you must tell me why you have that green ribbon. You must wait, said Jenny. I will tell you when the right time comes. Years passed. Alfred and Jenny grew old. One day, Jenny became very sick. The doctor told her that she was dying. Jenny called Alfred to her side and said, now I can tell you about the green ribbon. She told him to untie it so he could see why. And Jenny's head fell off.
One of the most terrifying cults that I have learned about recently refers to themselves as the Children. And the reason that they terrify me so much is because they are related to so many other cults.
Well, Scientology came about in 1953.
And 2 members from this church, Robert D. Grimson and Marianne McLean, decided to leave it and start the cult of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And they brought their satanic teachings to the US around the 1970s. Well, if you guys watched my previous video about the Son of Sam killings, which occurred in New York City around the 1970s, you might be able to connect these 2 things together. Well, the issue with this case is that one man was convicted.
But it seems as though police really fudged this up.
There was so much attention around this case that they were just looking to just put someone behind bars instead of actually doing full investigations. Well, one editor named Maury Terry ended up taking investigating into his own hands. And not only was he able to find a substantial amount of evidence and cryptic messages, but he was also able to find where the cult would meet up for their rituals, Devil's Cave. Part 2 to why I don't think the Son of Sam worked alone. Well, it was rumored that there was a cult working in New York City that was an offshoot of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. They referred to themselves as the Children and ended up in Yonkers. Well, when Maury was doing his investigating, he was let know by several people that their rituals were done in Untermeyer Park, an estate that used to be absolutely beautiful. But as you can see from the pictures, there's now an abandoned pump house. And when investigating this, trigger warning, they found blood on the walls and blood on the ceiling. In symbolic writing. Not only this, but dead animals were everywhere, including specifically dogs. So then it was time to look back at David's letters, in which he made cultural references to Beelzebub, which is the demon known as Lord of the Flies, and Brat, which is a small devil. He also ended his letter as From the Gutters, which was quite literally the nickname for the abandoned pump house. And when holding how he signed his name at the end of the letters to the mirror, you can find the words Sam and Carr and Burke in it. So where were the actual sons of Sam, and why hadn't they been questioned? Part 3 to why I don't think the Son of Sam worked alone. Well, after Maury had taken an investigation into his own hand and was seeing all these connections, he went to the police with it. And he was essentially just told to shut it down. That they had their man behind bars, there's no way other people worked with him, even though there was clear indications that he was working with a cult, and none of the eyewitness sketches even looked like him. So the last thing to do would be able to tie the Sons of Sam to the actual case. So John, Michael, and Wheat Carr were all the kids of Sam, Michael and John specifically being the sons. After talking to neighbors, there were several stories about Sam beating them. Their father Sam struggled with alcoholism, and this was all included in the letter that David wrote. So Maury's like, okay, let's go do investigating in the place that they were from, Minot, North Dakota. And when they got to their hometown, they were told by everyone that they were legitimately cult leaders. There was accounts of them sacrificing dogs, drinking blood, all of the work. So Maury was like, okay, we need to actually get a hold of these guys. Maybe they'll be open to talking about it, but soon after that, it was reported that they both mysteriously died. Part 4 to why I don't think the Son of Sam worked alone. So how did the other suspects mysteriously die, you might be asking? Well, one randomly unalived himself, while the other died in a mysterious car crash, which is entirely suspicious. So after adding all of this evidence together, they were able to release it to the public. And it made sense that Berkowitz would have had other people watching, other people holding the gun, other people doing the killings, all orchestrated by a cult leader. But because their main suspects for this case were now dead, there wasn't really much that they could do. Maury was trying to prevent this from happening again, though. Like, what if the children decide to send another member of theirs out? Either way, their parent cult, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, was neighbors to Charles Manson, and is where he got many of his own foundational ideas for his cult. So it's so clear that these connections run deep. Let me know what you guys think of this case. Let me know if there's anything in this that you want me to talk about next, like Scientology or Charles Manson, or if you want to hear more about the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Either way, follow my Instagram for more content.
The students at the school for nursing got along quite well, except for Alice. The problem with Alice was that she was just too perfect. Well, at least that's what it seemed like to the other students. She was always friendly, always cheerful. Her assignments were always on time and just perfect. Many of the students resented Alice. They would have liked to see her fail or cry or get scared sometimes, just to show she had weaknesses just like them. One night, many of the students tried to frighten Alice as a practical joke. They borrowed the hand of a corpse they had been studying in anatomy and tied it to the light cord in her closet. And when she tried to turn her light on, she would find herself holding a dead man's hand. That would scare anyone, one of them said. Afterwards, they went to the movie theaters. When they got back, Alice was asleep. But when they didn't see her the next morning, they decided to find out what happened. They looked everywhere for Alice, and when they found her in the closet on her floor. She was sitting there staring at the hand and mumbling. Well, the joke worked, but nobody was laughing. Story time about the old man that died in our basement. At the time, my mom was a CNA and she would do at-home care. One of the people that she took care of was one of her best friend's uncles. She would drop him off Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. He was in the 70s, he had arthritis, and was bedridden. So my mom would feed him, clean him, and change his diapers. But he was so mean. He didn't like me or my brothers and sisters. Just a little old grumpy man. But my mom would keep all her patients in the basement. By the way, which didn't look like a basement. It looked really nice, almost like a hospital type. So one day my mom needed to leave the house to go get food for the man. And she told me to watch out for her and call her if anything ever happened. So I went down there and he just stared at me the whole time. I said hello and he rolled his eyes. Couple hours passed, I'm scrolling on my phone, and his heart starts beating really fast. He looked like he was trying to cough and was reaching out for me. Everything happened so fast, I was in shock and I didn't know what to do, and he grabbed my arm. When I was 6 years old, my family moved to Virginia because my dad had a new job opportunity. We moved to this really old house that every step that you took, you'd hear the floorboards cracking. During the summer, I met this girl named Lucy. She knocked on my door one day and asked if I wanted to play, so for weeks, me and Lucy grew closer. We'd play hopscotch, jump rope, hand games, and hide and seek. One day, we were getting ready to play hopscotch, and my mom came outside telling me to come in and eat dinner. I asked my mom if Lucy could come too. My mom had asked, "Who's Lucy?" I looked back at Lucy and I said, "She's right here." My mom replied, "Right where?" When I turned back around, Lucy disappears. I called out for Lucy, but my mom yells out, "There isn't anyone out there. Get your butt in the house. It's time to come eat." It gets a little bit paranormal after this incident, but come back for part 2 if you want to know why Lucy disappeared. This is part 2 of why my friend Lucy disappeared. A week later after the incident happened, I saw Lucy playing outside with a little baby boy. He had to be around 2 years old. I quickly ran outside and said, "Hey, where'd you go the other day?" Lucy replied, "I wasn't feeling good, so I went home." I asked her, "Is that your baby?" And Lucy laughed and said, "No, this is my baby brother. I take care of him." And I asked again, "Don't your parents do that?" Lucy said, "No. They couldn't save us." I said, "Save?" And Lucy gets a little frustrated and said, "They just abandoned us, but we don't need them anymore. We take care of ourselves." Lucy then says, "We gotta get home. We'll see you another time." She took her brother's hand and turned the corner. I watched them go, but when I looked down the corner they turned, they both disappeared. I'm running out of time. Sorry guys. Come back for a part 3. What's the most messed up thing someone has ever told you after barely knowing them? Well, I'm gonna go first. So in high school, I would take public transportation back home. Well, this one lady got on a bus with her daughter and sat next to me. I looked over and told her that her daughter looked very pretty. Then out of nowhere, she just starts crying. I asked, "Ma'am, are you alright?" And she says, "It's my husband." I didn't want to be invasive, but I asked, "Did something happen?" Then she goes on a 10-minute rant about how abusive her husband was and that she tried to stay for the baby. She was scared, but she finally had the courage to go. I felt bad and asked her, "Is there anything I could do to help?" And she proceeds to tell me that everything is fine. I'm like, "Are you sure?" She replies, "Yes, everything is fine. He had a peanut allergy and he died last week." And I'm like shook. And I said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And she responds, No, it's better that he's gone anyway." And I'm like, "Huh?" Right after, she prepares to get off the bus and she grabs her daughter. I said bye. Right before she gets off, she said she put peanuts in his food. When I was 24, me and my sister moved into an apartment together. At the time, I was going to college to get my master's, and she was going in to get her degree. The rent was $500 a month. I know, cheap. We only paid $250 each. But the neighborhood was bad. There was a lot of crackhead, gangs. There was a shooting just about every week. I know, just crazy. Anyways, one day in the middle of the night, we get a hard banging on our door, and it's a lady calling out for help. When I opened it, she had a black eye, she was bruised up, and her forehead was bleeding. I asked what's going on, and she replied her boyfriend is trying to kick her and her kids out of their place. She explained she has a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and her boyfriend is throwing all of their things out. So I walked over back to her apartment, which was 2 floors down. When we finally reached the apartment, the whole apartment was on fire. She screamed and said her babies were in there. Come back for part 2. This is part 2 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. If you didn't watch part 1, go watch that so you can understand this part. So, like I said, the apartment was on fire and she was screaming about her kids. And she tried to run in and get her kids, but I stopped her because there was no way she and her kids were going to make it out alive. Few seconds later, her boyfriend walks up and says, "Let her go." And she runs over to him and swings on him a couple times and says, "What did you do? Get them out." And he replied, "I told you to leave, right?" She falls to her knees, and at that point, she just stops crying. So I run upstairs calling for help, telling everyone to get out and call the fire department. The fire starts to quickly spread, and everyone is coming out of their apartments. When I went back to the area where the lady was, her boyfriend disappeared, and I picked her up from off the ground. I brung her into the parking lot where everyone else was. After 20 minutes, the fire department finally shows up. Come back for part 3. This is part 3 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. So, like I said, the fire department finally shows up after 20 minutes. I told them there were kids inside, and they went up to find them. They put the fire out. Right after, a firefighter came up to me and said there was no one in there, and I told him no, there were 2 kids. A couple minutes later, a few detectives and cops came up to me and asked me a few questions about the scene, asking things like if I know who started it and about my neighbors. Couple minutes later, there was an old man, which I found out was one of my neighbors. He came from the side of the apartment complex screaming that there was a little boy on his back, lying on the ground, saying that he couldn't move. So quickly, the detective go over to where my neighbor said the boy was. I'm running out of time. Part 4 will be up soon. This is part 4 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. After one of my neighbors claimed they saw a little boy on the ground in the back of the apartment complex, and the boy's arm was pillows wrapped up in a comforter. When the detective got the paramedics to pick the boy up, they took the comforter he had and they opened it, and inside was a baby. After the whole situation was over, they took me in for questioning. Also, by the way, they admitted the lady into the hospital as well because she was bruised up really bad, and anytime anyone asked her anything, she was mute. During my time in the police station, they told me about the little boy. Come to find out, that little boy on the ground in back of the apartment complex was her son. They said he wrapped his baby sister up to protect her from getting hurt. Baby girl was fine. The pillows he wrapped her in softened her fall. But for the little boy, he was paralyzed from.
Why does the entirety of the Denver International Airport have barbed wire facing inwards? Almost like a prison, it's trying to keep something in. The Denver International Airport is home to so many conspiracy theories. I went there several times within my own traveling, and whether you believe the conspiracy theories or not, it is so hard to argue that the entire airport is not suspicious. DIA was built as a replacement to the Stapleton Airport, even though nothing was wrong with the airport before. It was supposed to be done in 1993, but it didn't end until 1995, the final budget being $4.8 billion. And if you guys don't know this, that exceeds normal airport price. And to put it into even more perspective, this airport and its grounds are bigger than Manhattan. So what was the purpose of making it so big and expensive? The builders for the DIA worked under multiple contractors, so it's rumored that no one knows the true scope of this project. But maybe the architects wanted it this way. It's filled with strange markings, underground tunnels, and apocalyptic themes. So the first thing that I'm going to be starting with is Blucifer. I feel like a lot of people already know about this demon-eyed horse that stands out in front. The reason that Blucifer got his name, his actual name is just Blue Mustang, was because he ended up killing his creator. As he was building, the head ended up falling off, hitting his leg, cutting into an artery. And to add to the creepiness, it has red glowing eyes whenever you look at it from a certain angle. So everyone in Colorado pretty much just refers to it as Blucifer. Many people think that the red eyes are a nod to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but an artist said it's just to honor the wild spirit of the American West. Weird. Also in the front of the airport, there's a tile with a picture of a cart on it. In the cart, it says AUAG, like for silver and gold. But some people think that this is referring to a deadly strain of hepatitis called Australian antigen, which is believed to be a part of biological warfare. And while I originally thought that this was kind of far, the man who discovered Australian antigen was actually a part of the team that founded the airport. And there's more that stays on this apocalyptic theme. Welcome to the next part of Denver International Airport. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the Great Hall. In there is a plaque with the dedication for the airport on there, and they dedicated it to the New World Airport Commission, which is an organization that doesn't even exist or has ever existed. So why would this even be a dedication? Under this capstone, there is a time capsule. This is set to be open in 2094, but no one knows what's inside of it. There are symbols and markings in this said to be dedicated to the Freemasons, which carry their own separate theories about being linked to the Illuminati. A lot of people also say that from an aerial view, the airport looks like a swastika, but honestly, I don't really think it's noticeable unless you're really, really looking for it. And the other things is the creepy murals. These were designed by Leo Tanguma. One is called World Dream of Peace, and the other is in peace and harmony with nature. However, they're depicting themes of death and again, apocalyptic times. I'm pretty sure a soldier stabbing a dove means the exact opposite of peace. And there's literally children in caskets, but don't worry, it doesn't stop there. Welcome back to Denver International Airport. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about the tunnels. There are 6 underground layers and possibly more. And it's thought that the tunnels that exist underneath go all the way from Colorado Springs Air Force Base to the Air Force Base on Cheyenne Mountain. There's theorized to be bunkers down here, and that it's potentially made as a safe place for the world's elite during the apocalypse. A huge part of this theory lies with author Alex Christopher. She met some people at a conference in Denver who were able to take her down to the tunnels. She took her friend Phil Schneider with her. And down there, they were able to get pictures. I'll insert them here. But not long after this, Schneider apparently unalived himself, which again, after coming out with this information, is extremely suspicious. Also, there was 5 buildings that were originally built for the airport but didn't quite work out. So instead of destroying these buildings, they just buried them and then continued to build on top of them. Even the constructor was very confused on why he was requested to do this. So because of this, how do we know how many extra buildings or hangars there are? And what exactly are the specific conspiracy theories surrounding this apocalyptic themed airport? So what exactly are people theorizing involving the Denver International Airport? Well, the 2 huge ones is that it's either connected to the Illuminati or to the apocalypse, and may even potentially be the Illuminati headquarters. So the Freemasons have so many conspiracy theories surrounding them about them being linked to the Illuminati. And there's several Freemason markings around this airport. The airport is also just so expensive, and maybe they got their funding from the Illuminati. The exchange may have been money for headquarters. And the tunnels make it very, very easy to move in and out. And if you're a secret society running the nation, why wouldn't you be located at an airport? The other theory, like I stated before, is that this is for the apocalypse, to keep the elite inside. Just because of how the tunnels are set up in the rumored bunkers, and with all of the hints being around the airport, and the Australian antigen, it's giving us very much apocalyptic New World Order vibes. But also the barbed wire facing in is very concentration camp-like. Either way, this airport has fully embraced these conspiracy theories. They have an animatronic gargoyle that sits out in front and talks to you about them, which making a joke about it would be the easiest way to cover it.